Ukraine launched its counteroffensive against Russia 5 months ago, but is only now seeing some small victories. The Ukrainian army has recaptured 2 eastern villages and also made some breakthroughs in the south. Well, to talk a bit more about the counteroffensive, let's bring in Peter Zalmayev, the director of the Eurasian Democracy Initiative and a military expert, joining me live from Kyiv. Peter, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us. What are your thoughts here on this Ukrainian counteroffensive? There have been some small victories, but just the first in 5 months. Would you say it's been a failure or a success?
Well, at this point, I would say with the guarded sense of optimism that the Ukraine is maintaining its initiative in this counteroffensive. It's been obviously much slower than some had hoped for. But then what do you expect for any sort of military action without dominance in the air, which Ukraine has lacked from the get-go? And it's engaged in talks with Western allies about the provision of F-16s. But when will they arrive is another question. So given what Ukraine has been able to get from Western allies, given that Ukraine has suffered high rates of attrition, maybe not as high as the Russian side, but then Russia has many more soldiers and a much larger population, as you know, that all things considered, Ukraine has, I think, performed quite remarkably, considering that it's been able to strike at targets deep inside the Crimea. It took out 2 very important air defense systems, very costly air defense systems by the Russians there. And so I think I would say guardedly that the initiative is still on Ukraine's side.
Today in Germany, Peter, representatives from dozens of countries that back Kyiv are meeting at the Ramstein Air Base to talk about more aid for Ukraine. What does Ukraine need exactly now to win this war?
We are hearing good signals from Washington on the eve of Zelensky's meeting with President Biden. Austin, the Secretary of Defense, has announced that finally the Abrams tank will be coming to Ukraine. And we're very, very hopeful that after that meeting, Biden will announce the provision of ATACMS, which is a long-range missile, which will enable Ukraine to continue striking deeper into and behind Russia's front lines, not into Russia proper, which is the condition that will definitely be attached to it. But it definitely needs to make the logistical operations of the Russian much harder in order to to finally strike at that corridor that is connecting mainland Russia with the Crimea, in effect severing the Russian army. If that is achieved, and for that Ukraine does not really need to reach the Azov Sea shore, all it has to do is reach it within 20 kilometers of it to establish essential control, and that will have been a major, major victory.
You mentioned these Abrams tanks coming from the U.S. or due to come from the U.S. in the coming days. Now, their delivery is a bit of a U-turn, as American defense officials had repeatedly said in the past that they weren't well suited for Kyiv's forces because of their complexity. What do you read into this turnaround, if and when they get delivered?
Well, I do read into it that America understands that, it lost quite a bit of time before when Ukraine was requesting these weapons after its successful counteroffensive in Kharkiv and the capture of Kherson exactly a year ago. That's when the all sorts of armaments should have been flowing to Ukraine to capitalize on essentially the rout of the Russian forces. Instead, they got so entrenched and they mined that area so heavily that it's been very slow going. So I think America understands that it cannot repeat the same mistakes. It has to give Ukraine and will give Ukraine everything that it has short of nuclear weapons. But once again, let's not be naive about any decisive advantage any of these armaments has. We need all of it, and we need all of it in combination. And drones. Drones will also be essential in the days and weeks and months to come. We see that Russia has ratcheted up production of all sorts of weapons, including drones, and Ukraine will have to match Russia item for item in order to at least maintain parity on the battlefield.
Peter, I just want to ask you very briefly about this New York Times report this morning that said that a deadly explosion at a market in eastern Ukraine earlier this month was caused by a Ukrainian missile. How likely is it, do you think, that that could have indeed been a case of friendly fire?
Right now, the official line by Ukraine's defense ministry is that the investigation is pending, and so they have offered no comments. My position is that When things like that happened, we should have no compunction about being honest about these things, because ultimately the responsibility of everything that's happening in this war rests with the aggressor, with Russians. So I don't think it detracts from Ukraine's righteous cause that some of these missiles stray and mistakes do happen.
Okay, Peter, thank you for that. Peter Zalmayev speaking to me live from Kyiv.